where we focus on the G20, co-presented and co-hosted by myself, Thami Ngubeni, on Africa in Business on Channel Africa, and the one and only Ashraf Garda, hosting the National Punts on SAFM. A very good afternoon to you.
Right, so here we are. We're just about to the end of Women's Month. It's amazing how August has gone by so quickly, right? But therefore, our G20 Countdown feature today focuses on women and women empowerment and looking at the issues that women need to ensure that they are at the very center of South Africa's economic future. The Women to Africa Summit, Thami.
A really exciting gathering that's going to be taking place tomorrow. That is a gathering of policymakers, business leaders and entrepreneurs with one objective: to discuss strategies for advancing women's participation in Africa's economic growth. And this afternoon, we're going to be talking to Standard Bank. They, in collaboration with the G20 Empowerment of Women Working Group, are going to be hosting the summit.
Absolutely. Now, the G20 Empowerment of Women Working Group, and the acronym is EWWG, so Women to Africa Summit, aims to highlight the role of women in shaping sustainable development and strengthening Africa's position in the global economy. I would think, based upon our callers, they always say, like, okay, how does it really work? So let's find out more about it. We're joined on the line by Lindeka Dzedze, the Head of Strategic Partnerships for Global Markets at the Standard Bank Group.
A very good afternoon to you, Lindeka. Good to have you with us. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Perhaps let's start off. I did somewhat explain what the objectives are, but, you know, there's no better place to hear it than straight from the horse's mouth. And you, for the intents of this conversation, happen to be that horse as the representative for Standard Bank. So perhaps let's start there. The main objectives of the Women to Africa Summit, which is hosted under the G20 Empowerment of Women Working Group. And while you're at it, how did Standard Bank, in the midst of all the other financial services providers, be the one to spearhead this along with the G20 group?
Thank you. I think for the most important thing for the day for us is we know there's been a lot of work around the G20 Empowerment of Women Working Group and other lobby groups. But one of the things that we wanted to do was to actually gather in one space, in one room, where we can have leading voices in the continent, really, in the diaspora, across sectors and public sector, and to actually have an action-driven dialogue on how the gaps are known. You know, what is the coordinated action that we need to take to close the gap? We are all looking forward to an action-driven dialogue on gender equality and financial inclusion. And I think the most important thing for us is that making sure that we have men as essential partners in the conversation, because these are the people that we need to shift institutional power and actually solution together. What is most important and why Standard Bank is involved? This is important to Standard Bank. Gender is inherent in everything that we do across the bank. And we actually together and partnered with governments across the continent and with Jura, the investment manager, to launch the African Women Impact Fund, which aims to build a sustainable platform to grow the number of women-owned and women-led fund management businesses that in turn actually tend to invest in other women. So this is something that we've done, and we have an exciting announcement that's going to take place on the day, but I don't want to give that away. So that is the whole point of tomorrow. It is, how do we translate declarations into actions? Because women are tired. We do not want any more shop talk. We want to make sure that we can come into a room to agree on what needs to happen and start building a framework that we can take out of that room and start building on, because G20 is going to leave, but we will be here. So this is the start of something that we're hoping that is going to be an industry-driven work around actually solutioning for where finance comes from, where funding and access to market is for women, that women have been screaming about for days now.
Well, that's so fascinating, Lindeka, because, I often talk about linking personal purpose to the national purpose. And the absence of that, for me, is always a void that we have in our country and perhaps in other countries around the continent and around the world. So it is in that context of making this link. Let's talk about this. What about the G20 Empowerment of Women Working Group, and how will that group and the Women to Africa Summit link women's empowerment to Africa's competitiveness in the global economy? Because as we have seen from the political shifts globally, nobody's going to dish out favors. You have to develop a way to be globally competitive.
So I always say this, financial inclusion is not a charity, it's actually a sustainable business. It actually allows you to grow new revenue pools that actually have a tangible impact in terms of our communities. So it grows our businesses, it grows our communities. The G20 Empowerment of Working Group is driven at a government level, but any declaration thereof that goes forward has to be translated into action. That cannot happen alone. The government has done enough work in terms of policies. There's been frameworks that have been done, yet the barriers still persist and the gaps are still there. So the collaboration to say, as private sector, how do we intentionally partner with government to actually translate the declarations into actions and make sure that we then come back and actually measure those, tangibly, purposely measure those and be able to report back. So it's no longer just saying government is doing X, but how do we partner? G20 is going to go away. We will still be here. And this is more important for us as South Africa, but not only as South Africa, but as a potential to uplift the entire GDP of the continent. Because the numbers are there that says if you actually make sure that women participate in the economy, it has the potential to uplift the entire GDP of the continent. That cannot be led by government alone. It has to have private sector. We have to take ownership of that. So it's that movement now from shared, isolated efforts into shared accountability as a sector, across sectors, because it's not just finance, it's DFIs, it's private, it's corporates across the continent. That's what's exciting about us. So now we're going to do it ourselves, and then we bring in academia because we don't want to also mark our own homework. But I think there's more action, and I think there's a feeling in the air that everyone wants this to shift now. Hence, we're all doing it.
And I want to pick up on that, Lindeka. You've really made it a point to, as you say, that we've got to move from declarations to actions, that women are tired of talk shops, summit after summit, and yet none of that actually translates into anything tangible that will impact their lives. I'd like us to get into the nitty-gritty of what expectations you have. What are the commitments specifically, or the partnerships that are expected to emerge from this gathering? Because ultimately, I guess you want these commitments, you want these conversations, these agreements, these partnerships to influence the policy discussions within the G20 framework.
So there's been pre-work that has been happening. So we're not gathering tomorrow out of the blue. There's already been engagements with all the key stakeholders. We are working with professors at GIBS that are looking into a thought leadership piece that will actually summarize and take out the key thematics that will come out of the sessions tomorrow. We also know that we already also, as those who are participants in the ecosystem where the gaps are, hence we're talking about collaborative ecosystems. There's a huge focus in terms of what I do as Standard Bank, what ABSA does, what Investec does, what JP Morgan does, what ABE does. But is there an opportunity for us to say, here's where the gaps are? Maybe there's a huge concentration in these areas where women are actually lacking in this. So there's already work that's being done, and AFDB is huge on the data that we're looking at. So there's already partnership in terms of we need localized data that speak to our own lived realities so that we know that we actually work on something that we know. So there's work that we're thinking we're plotting on from a thought leadership and data perspective, where there's already sort of commitments and people said we're putting our hands up to do this work. And after that, when I walk out of there with a sort of a framework in terms of the key areas that we all want to get involved in, and then some sort of implementation modalities, even if it's not fully refined, because we're not going to stop tomorrow. The point is we're going to regroup. We're looking at putting some dates on the ground, as in March next year. Do we come back with a framework that we can then work together? And one of the things that's important I want to actually note is that, remember, we're not reinventing the wheel here. There's been work that has been done by from the women that were in Nairobi 40 years ago, Beijing Declaration, Platform for Action. So we're building off all of that, and there are working groups within South Africa and across that are doing work, like with Kona and others. So it is now coming together to say, instead of working in silos, how to work together and also bring the institutions on board. So their plan is we have an action-driven day, come up with thematics and areas where we want to partner, have the thought leadership and their data and walk out of there with the people that want to partner. I can tell you now, the other banks that I'm working with have already been messaging that we want to partner next year, we want to drive this together. So there's already that shift, if I may call it, in terms of before you want to do things as yourself, as Standard Bank with ABSA, there's already that desire to actually partner in solutioning. So those are the key areas we're saying that there's a framework that we're going to work out with, some data we want to put in the ground, some data that we want to do, and some thought leadership that will be driven by those in the academia. And then government is also keen to partner going forward with the private sector to drive this and own it.
Now, let me end with this. I mean, we talk about the long-term impact of the Africa of the summit itself, right? So, what for you would be the long-term, lasting impact, and how would you measure it?
The funding gap, access to finance. If you speak to any, and I think it will be. That's the data, firstly, that we're looking for, right? Because nobody, there's a Wi-Fi code that's out there where we all want to make sure we're measuring the same things. So that Standard Bank is, you're publishing your own data and somebody else. That public declaration of the data is important. Measuring purposely, and all of us being able to say, this is how many women have been funded. So far, we all see the same number of women getting funding, and there's yet not much is moving in the Dow. I guess the actual numbers of women, because everyone talks about the date statistics, we want to be able to say we funded how many. Mm-hmm. So, for example, within the foundation that is part of AWIF for Standard Bank, we have now funded 10 women where you can see their faces and you know their names and the data is published. That is going to be the one thing. The reporting is going to be crucial to actually put the numbers out and you're going to see the faces. I think that's the commitment that the whole Wi-Fi code, that is the project of G20, is important. The declaration, because right now everybody published their own numbers. I don't think there's a set standard that we all adhere to. And I think once that is something that we take forward, that will actually be able to give us the numbers.
All right. I'm going to keep an eye on that access to funding matrix, Thami.
No, certainly. What an exciting, development, because ultimately you have to be comparing on the same scale. That's the only way to be able to measure with integrity and really be able to see what progress is being made by the industry. Ms. Lindeka Dzedze, Head of Strategic Partnership for Global Markets at Standard Bank Group, wishing you all the best for the Women to Africa conference, or summit rather, that's taking place tomorrow under the G20 flag. It's exactly 28 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African time. Ashraf Garda, always a pleasure, and looking forward to our time once again next week as we focus towards the big November where the G20 summit will be held.
G20 in Africa.